All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Education Week's K-12 Essentials Forum. We'll be covering the supporting struggling readers in middle school and high school. My name is Ryan Jones. I'm the Development Associate here at EdWeek, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's event. So we'll be hearing from a variety of seasoned guests, including reporters from EdWeek's very own newsroom, esteemed experts in the education space, and we also have two great discussion agendas or sessions on our agenda today. Plus, we really want to hear from you and have two interactive sessions ready so where you can ask all of your questions that you're burning to get an answer to and see what your peers in the audience are also experiencing. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. A huge special thank you to K-12 Tutoring for Schools in the 95% group. They're two of today's sponsors for the event, and you'll be hearing from them in our program a little later on. And for most of this event, the chat in the Zoom will actually be closed. However, we will open it up for the interactive sessions so that you can participate and share any of your thoughts. But while that chat will be closed, the Q&A feature is open throughout the forum, and that's where we really encourage you to direct all of your questions to our expert guests. And for any links that you'd like to read more about some of these important topics and see any information that you might have missed from today's speakers, you can visit the resources area that can be found in your Zoom ribbon where the chat and Q&A icons are also located. So with that, I'm very excited to turn things over to the real expert here. I'd like to welcome Education Week's very own Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Sawchuk, and he's going to be leading us through the exciting topics that we're going to cover today. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. We're very excited that you're all here today for our session, Supporting Struggling Readers in Middle and High School. As Ryan said, I'm Stephen Sawchuk, an assistant managing editor at EdWeek, and I'm the editor of this special report. About a year ago, EdWeek asked educators what they wanted us to cover more in our reporting about reading and literacy. The response was deafening. Many of them said that they had older students who still struggled with fundamental elements of decoding. Some were teachers in middle and high school who themselves hadn't been trained in literacy. After all, at those grade levels, they're supposed to be teaching content, not early reading. That's why we devised this report. We're thrilled to be able to bring you both new data on the scope of the problem, rich solutions-based reporting, and insights as to how this could help shape future policy. So with that background, I think we can get right to our first interactive session. What do you say, Ryan?
Say we're ready to jump right back in. So thanks, Stephen, for that introduction. So for our first session that we have, we're going to get to knowing what we know about older readers and their challenges. So we're going to be asking some polling questions, and we're going to turn on the chat. So feel free to jump in, share your thoughts, and react to some of these questions. So Stephen, what do you say? You ready to dive in?
Yeah, ready.
All right, so we're going to be launching our first poll here. So our first question is what percentage of middle and high school students in your school slash district struggle with basic reading skills? And Stephen, while our audience is answering that question, what have you seen that kind of is, how are you really defining basic reading skills for this data point? So we can get a little more context.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we didn't want to sort of when we surveyed, we actually did a survey of about 700 educators, and we'll be comparing the results that we get from our audience today with what our nationally representative sample said. But basically, we didn't want to sit there and sort of list out phonemic awareness, comprehension, all of the complicated elements that make up. Um, skilled reading. But we sort of, by putting this question out, we were talking about students at these levels whose reading is not strong enough for them to get out of the content that is presented in those areas, what they need to get out of it. Students whose teachers feel like they're still doing a lot of work catching students up to have those skills.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a core skill that we see in all of our academic curriculums, and sometimes you really do forget that it's really the basis that you need to build that foundation on. But looking through our poll questions here, I'm going to release the poll and share these results. So, Stephen, as you can see here, we had 42% of our participants vote that between a quarter and half of their students in the school or district are struggling with those basic reading skills. How does that compare to the national survey that you and your team conducted?
This is not too far off. We had in our survey that about 30%, so more than our audience today with us, said up to a quarter. 34%, which is a little less, said between 26% and half. 21% said up to 75%. And then smaller, just like here, smaller percentages said more than three-quarters of their kid. But I do think, by any objective measure, like looking at this, like when you let me see if I add these up, just those two middle categories, to say that 65% of people who responded to this poll just today say that more than a quarter of their secondary students are struggling, all the way up to maybe even three-quarters. I think that tells us a lot about the size of the problem. Like, this is not unusual. This is fairly common. And yet, and this is really why we did this report, like a lot of the conversation about reading is still stuck on K through 3, possibly, right? And I think there's still this assumption that you get out of third grade and you've got those basic skills. And I think what we're seeing here is that that is not the case. So, in some ways, I think this is a very serious finding, but I think it also is the rationale for why we wanted to have this webinar and why we wanted to do these stories.
Yeah, I think those polling responses just shows really, the importance of the work that you're doing. So I know I personally want to thank you, Stephen, and I'm sure the audience is very engaged as well. So we're going to move on to our second question, just to see a little bit more and dig in more into this problem we're exploring. So, what, in your opinion, is the main reason that middle and high school students in your district struggle with reading? We obviously got the statistics that we're seeing a lot of struggling readers, but I think they come from a variety of different reasons. So, Stephen, while the audience is responding, what obstacles were you and your team seeing that really make it hard to address those adolescent reading needs?
That's a very good question. I'll be very interested to see the results of this. One of the core things, and this is going to sound so workaday and so obvious when I say it, but one of the problems is when you get to secondary education, either middle and high school, there is a lot less flexibility in the schedule because typically you're moving from teacher to teacher. Sometimes you're moving to different parts of the school building. The day is much more scheduled. So it's not like elementary where you're typically in sort of the self-contained classroom for several hours at a time, and you therefore have more flexibility that if your students need more reading intervention, you can create longer periods or block periods. So that's one thing we heard. Another thing we heard a lot about is that, when you're a teacher and you go through your licensing program or your teacher preparation program, if you aren't getting a reading, interventionist certificate, or you're not doing something in elementary literacy, you're not typically getting a lot of training on reading fundamentals, right? And things like phonics and phonemic awareness have very specific, discrete sort of scope and sequences that you have to follow, right? But if I'm learning how to be a middle school or a high school social studies teacher, I'm not going to have a methods class on that, right? So I may want to do everything I can to help my students with this, and I may not have the tools. We have another question about that in just a minute too. I do think that there are obstacles here, and I think I would also generally say that there is less in the research literature about how to help older students with who have these problems, simply because so much of what we know about how kids learn to read has been conducted in studies that were mostly looking at younger students.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, just how much the problems can compound if it starts with those younger students. And,
Right.
reading and comprehension is only more important as you get into those higher level mathematics classes, scientific classes, history classes.
Right.
So we're going to close the poll here. We've got great participation from the audience, seeing that over 70% of you guys
Yeah, and did you notice,
participated in
Ryan,
that poll.
in the chat here, like a couple of people said, "Gee, I wish I could check more than one of these options," right? Which is that I believe in our actual poll you could, and the one of the artifacts of like the Zoom thing is they don't let you like pick more than one for this question. But I think to your point, yes, like sometimes these factors reinforce and sort of play off one another. So we can talk a little bit about that. So let's see what the results are.
Yeah, it's looking, I think you make a great point, and the audience does as well, that, our results are very evenly spread out. We've got
Right.
32% that are
Yeah,
looking at, the students aren't reading fluently or automatically enough. But then, there's a lot kind of sitting between that 10 and 15%, showing that there's
absolutely.
not just one core problem that's
Yes. Yeah,
attributing to this issue,
that's
but
right.
it's, you know, almost death by a thousand cuts, if you may.
When we did this, the top three answers. So they aren't reading fluently or automatically enough. It was almost a third here. It was 19% in our own survey of educators. The motivation one was also quite high. That's the third one here. That was 28%. That was actually the highest. And then they aren't completing assignments was 11%. That's 7% here. You notice decoding is high here. And one of the things too is in some ways I think this question is actually people are seeing the same things and attributing it to a variety of factors. So for example, with motivation, a lot of the motivation for students for students who feel like they're not motivated to read sometimes is because they have a core deficit with decoding, right? Or reading fluently or reading automatically enough. And so we might think it's motivation, but really the core issue there is a challenge with sort of a fundamental reading skill. So I think all of these are legitimate factors that play into what we're seeing. And so then the question becomes, well, what do we do now? What do we do when a third of our secondary students aren't reading fluently or automatically enough? How can we change these figures that we're seeing?
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue into our next question here. And I just want to bring up a comment from Jennifer Williams I saw in the chat that, it's hard to be motivated when you can't do something. So I think you make a great point there is that if these
Yeah.
students are having trouble decoding, those figuratively simpler words, then, if you're giving them a huge paragraph or a book in front of them, that's the most overwhelming thing that could be put in their hands at that
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
So
I
looking
see Christopher
into
says the same things. If kids struggle with reading early on, then it's harder for them to get excited about doing it. And I think that's the motivation. I think that explains why we see motivation high up in the result.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've talked enough about some of the issues we're running into. We're always looking for that light at the end of the tunnel. So the next poll question that we're going to really look into is, have you received training to support middle and high school students who struggle with those basic reading skills? And if you want to put it in the chat, like what might some of that training look like? I know that we're all looking for some of the answers to these questions. And Stephen, while they're kind of putting some of their answers in, how common do you find it is for the teachers that you talk to on a national basis that are receiving that additional training for reading support in middle and high school levels?
I think it happens, but I don't think it's overwhelmingly common. And a lot of the states that have passed these laws about reading, I mean, often they are requiring teachers to go through various professional development programs, but often they are prioritized for teachers in elementary school, right? Even though some of that information could potentially be helpful for teachers of older grades and also teachers that are not just in English language arts, but in other subjects that are very text heavy, so science, social studies.
Yeah, and I just like to point all the audience to the chat here. I wish I could read off all the fantastic
Right, all the time. Yep.
kind of resources you guys are using from many different
Mhm.
states, but it's always great to see that there are so many ways to kind of tackle this issue. So, Stephen, I don't know if you see any that really stand out to you as something that you've kind of seen on a national level.
Well, I
I
mean,
see
I
that the
see, I
Wilson's
see,
Foundation's
I see a
training.
lot of people paid for it themselves, which I think is
Hmm.
telling in a way. Some people have mentioning specific programs, Wilson. Let's see, Amy Quarry notes multisyllabic word reading, morphemic awareness, explicit vocabulary instruction. Those are all of particular importance for older readers. And so some of our stories talk explicitly about those things that Amy has said. So it's nice to see her get really down to brass tacks with those. Like those are all things we'll be talking about later today. Um, I see some Julie, she didn't receive the training from the district. She had to get a PhD program, right? So that was presumably at least partly out of pocket, right? And so that actually does line up quite a bit with what we're hearing.
Yeah, so we're going to open up the poll now as we've looked
Yeah.
at a lot of
Mhm.
those great resources. We are going to do our best to compile those and possibly share them at the end of the webinar, just to make sure that we have those resources available. But Stephen, as you can see, kind of what you were saying that was a trend, I believe, from the national report is that a lot of this training is being sought out individually.
Yeah.
And then, we are seeing training being received from the schools and districts, but still almost a quarter of our audience hasn't received any training
Yeah.
in helping middle and high school students. I'd love for you to kind of dig a little bit into that. I know we've already picked this issue apart a little bit, but a quarter of our audience is receiving training. What does that tell you?
Nationally, it's even higher. Nationally, our survey suggests it's about one, and it's about only 40% of teachers said they hadn't received any training, right? I think we have a particularly motivated set of teachers here with us for the webinar because many of them sought the training out themselves, which I think is amazing from wanting to do right by your kids. It makes me worry a little bit about, that this was not provided, right, to you through sources that you have. We just as in here, where you see very few got it in teacher preparation, that was also the case in our own survey that most teachers did not receive information on how to support this population of struggling readers in teacher preparation. So that explains why so many people are doing it their own, getting their PhDs. Sometimes they're getting it through their state and district, but I don't think that is quite as common as it is for elementary teachers.
I couldn't agree more. And we can't give enough of a shout out to those teachers that are taking it upon themselves to really go above and beyond because we know that, everyone's going to be tired after a work day. And to take that training out of your own fruition is something that's really special and encouraging, despite some of the trends that we are seeing here. So, Stephen, I'd just like to thank you so much for all of your insights. I know that we could nerd out about reading and literacy pretty much all day. But we're going to keep the forum moving here and kind of turn to a little bit more of an industry's perspective. So we're going to be hearing from our sponsor, K-12 Tutoring. K-12 Tutoring is a national partner to school districts. They deliver a high impact tutoring led by certified teachers. And this program provides a targeted, consistent, and data informed instruction that aligns with district goals and supports measurable growth across grade levels. So K-12 tutoring really works alongside district leaders to make sure they can expand that instructional capacity and also ensure students receive the focused support they need to succeed. And with that, I'd love to bring in Jennifer Moore, K-12 Tutoring's General Manager, to the stage, just so she can share a little bit more about her thoughts from that industry perspective. So, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us, Ryan. Hello, everybody. Good to be here with you all. My name is Jen Moore. I am the General Manager of K-12 Tutoring, as Ryan mentioned. First off, I do want to thank you all for having us here. Thank you for your time. And I want to thank our event organizers at EdWeek for the opportunity to sponsor today's program. So as Ryan was mentioning, K-12 Tutoring is an evidence-based online tutoring provider, and uniquely, all of our tutors are exclusively US-based certified teachers. Today's webinar topic is especially near and dear to our hearts as we do a lot of high impact tutoring, working with young learners at districts across the country to help develop their literacy skills and to close those learning gaps. The research shows that the transition from third to fourth grade is a really pivotal one for literacy. This is the point at which students shift from learning to read to reading to learn. And so, because of this, these students who aren't proficient readers by the end of third grade tend to fall behind faster because every subject they then learn now relies on those reading comprehension skills. And the research shows that this gap compounds over time. And this affects graduation rates, college readiness, even lifetime earnings. One stat that we pulled shows that fully 1/3 of 12th grade students are performing at below basic levels of reading proficiency, meaning that they may not even be able to grasp the basic meaning of a text they read. And this, as we all are aware, has significant effects on future areas such as their health and financial literacy, as well as basic problem solving abilities and workplace skills. So in an ideal world, what would we want to do here? We want to concentrate and really front load that literacy intervention in those early grades so that all readers are functioning on grade level as they finish third grade. But unfortunately, as we're all aware in the real world, we have seen that this gap exists. And then the central question then becomes, and the question that we're really focusing on in today's programming is how do we support those students who've already passed that milestone but are still struggling? And this question is really urgent since throughout a student's educational journey, reading is the primary route through which knowledge transfer occurs. And adding to that challenge, middle and high school content grows even more text heavy, even more abstract, more vocabulary dense. So those students who are struggling with decoding or fluency, as we were talking about earlier, they often end up spending so much cognitive effort processing the words that they then struggle to process meaning. So this showed up in our second poll question earlier, where folks cited that their students just simply aren't reading fluently or automatically enough. And so without intervention, these students then disengage, they lose confidence, they even avoid reading tasks, and all of this just further widens that gap. By adolescence, these gaps can show up across all subjects, and they do show up across all subjects. So ELA, but also science, social studies, and even math. So, in the face of this multi front challenge, it can be very easy to feel daunted and to buy into some of the common myths about adolescent literacy. The first of these is that it's just too late to help those older students. Research does show, though, that adolescents can make substantial reading gains with targeted instruction. But this can be increasingly difficult to do in a traditional classroom where you have multiple other students at varying reading levels. The second myth is that they just need more practice reading. What struggling readers actually need is explicit instruction in comprehension and overall study strategy. So it's not just more time, more practice. It's explicitly guided and scaffolded instruction that we can deliver in parallel with their classroom learning to help keep them on track with the skills and knowledge of the current coursework so that they don't fall further and further behind. The great news is that tutoring is a really well-studied and well-documented intervention that can help us give these struggling learners the acceleration-focused support they need to help them bridge that gap to on-grade level performance. The reasons why tutoring works so well rest on the fact that it's a really individualized and relationship-based delivery format, especially when this high-impact tutoring is delivered by a consistent, well-trained instructor. This format ensures that there's a trusting environment that the tutor can build up with the student over time so that they can meet the student exactly where they are and then move them forward using evidence-based techniques for explicit literacy instruction. So some of these can include things like explicit decoding instruction for students who have those foundational skills gaps. So things like phonics, multisyllabic word reading, as we were talking about earlier. Also, these tutors can work with students on vocabulary and morphology instruction to help them unlock the more academic language that they start to see as they get into those upper grade levels. Comprehension strategy instruction is also a really important area. So this is things like how to summarize, how to annotate texts, and identify main ideas. And then finally, tutors can also just give students a lot of opportunities for guided practice with appropriately leveled text. And here we're not talking about baby books, but we're also not talking about grade level novels that may be inaccessible to them. So all of this means that high dosage tutoring is one of the most effective interventions for catching students up academically, particularly in reading. Studies consistently show between about a 0.2 and a 0.4 standard deviation reading gain for adolescents with consistent tutoring. And specifically, we've seen that targeted small group or one-on-one tutoring improves those decoding, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension skills. And importantly, tutoring has also been shown to increase engagement and even school attendance, which further supports learning across the board, whatever these students are working on. There's quite a few papers out there that support these points in greater detail. I'd encourage you to check out some of those that are cited here. At K-12 Tutoring, our own research has further shown that these kinds of learning gains can be achieved all the way up through high school, as measured on things like state assessments, benchmark assessments, and also course grades. One of our studies on the impact of high schoolers' course grades is shown in the graph at the top of this page. also referenced in the last bullet point here at the bottom. Notably, we saw similar amounts of growth across both ELA and math. That were strongly correlated to a statistically significant degree with the dosage of tutoring that students received. So that really gives us a lot of hope, an indication that it is not too late, even in high school, to make substantial literacy gains, even with those high schoolers. So to sum up, the reading gap tends to widen over time, but it doesn't have to. Tutoring is one of the most evidence-based approaches we have for helping middle and high school students access grade level learning and, as a result, brighter futures. I want to thank you all so much for your time and for your engagement today. It's been a delight being here with you and getting to share some of these insights. I hope you enjoy and get a ton of value out of the rest of today's programming. If you are interested in learning more and connecting with us at K-12 Tutoring, I would encourage you to use this QR code. You can access our website, and you can let us know over there if you'd like to have a call with our team and perhaps learn a little bit more about how we can support your district's readers. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will hand it back to Ryan.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a great session, and we do appreciate the work that you guys are doing at K-12 tutoring for today's event and also sponsoring the event. So now we're going to bring back up another one of our own Education Week staffers. We have staff writer Sarah Schwartz. She's going to be bringing along two folks from New Hampshire's Bow Memorial School in the 7th and 8th grade special education teachers, and Carrie Harris and reading specialist Laura Lynn LaBombard. They're coming to the virtual stage to really discuss their district's bold plan to support secondary readers, and they made some great progress. So welcome, Sarah, Carrie, and Laura Lynn.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I think, are we still waiting for Carrie and Laura Lynn to join us? Okay, well, I can start introducing them, and then hopefully we'll see them in a moment. Oh, okay, I think they're here. Great. Hi. Great. Yeah, well, thanks so much, Ryan. I'll start by telling everyone a little bit about what we're going to talk today, and then I'll introduce Laura Lynn and Carrie. I'm here with Laura Lynn LaBombard and Carrie Harris, who are both educators at Bow Memorial School. It's a middle school in New Hampshire, and today we're going to talk about a program that they started at the school to help middle grade students with foundational literacy skills. So we've probably, oh, yeah, are you guys connected?
There we are. We're stuck in the room.
Great. So I was just, I don't know if you could hear me. I was just telling, I was talking a little bit about what we're going to talk about, and then I'm going to introduce you both. Thank you so much for joining us. I was saying we're going to talk about the program that you both started at Bow Memorial School to help middle grade students with foundational reading skills. And I think everyone in the audience has probably heard the saying that first you learn to read and then you read to learn. It's kind of assumed that students will learn foundational reading skills in elementary school, and then by the time that they get to middle school and beyond, they won't need help with things like figuring out how to break down complex, long, multisyllabic words, or they won't need help with reading fluency. And that might be true for some students, but it's not true for all students. And there's a lot of reasons why that can be the case, which I'm sure we'll get into. But whatever the reasons, these students need support, and not all middle schools are set up to provide this support, and even fewer high schools. But Bow is one that's trying to do this right now. So I'm going to introduce Laura Lynn and Carrie, and then I'm going to jump into some questions. Dr. Laura Lynn LaBombard lives with her family in Concord, New Hampshire, and she works as a reading specialist at Bow Memorial School. She has 25 years of experience in special education and literacy, and she's worked with schools and organizations like the Stern Center for Language and Learning and the Wilson Language Training Corporation. She also works as an adjunct professor for the Vermont Higher Education Collaborative in Vermont. She teaches coursework in literacy. She earned her Ed.D. in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies from the University of Vermont and an MA in Special Education in 2000 from Assumption College. And then Carrie Harris, Carrie and her family live in Kentucky, am I saying that correct? New Hampshire, where they relocated in 2022 from California. Carrie is in her 18th year working in special education, and currently she is a special education teacher and case manager for 7th and 8th grade students at Bow Memorial School. Through UC San Diego, she earned a reading and literacy certification, an added authorization, and an MS in curriculum and instruction from Western Governors University. So thank you both so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if I can start by asking you to give a bit of an overview about the structured literacy class in Bow, just so everyone kind of can start in the same place and understand what the program that we're talking about looks like. So I'll turn it to Laura first and then to Carrie.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we have a structured literacy class available across all grade levels. So our school is grades 5 through 8. And I currently work in, I teach 2 different structured literacy classes, one for 5th grade and one for 6th grade. And I have the opportunity to co-teach that with the 5th grade special educator as well as a 6th grade special educator. Both of these classes happen as part of their English language arts curriculum. So our students come to us 4 days a week for about 45 minutes. And the class is really designed for students that have that word level deficit. They've all been either identified as having a special education need for direct explicit instruction in the area of basic reading skills, or potentially it could be a student that might have a tier 2 need with similar areas of need. Our instruction really focuses on explicit systematic instruction, following those 6 syllable types as kind of our guide. Each of our days when our students come in, we start off with phonological awareness. So it's a very predictable type of instruction. I typically have a reading day and then a spelling day. If it's a reading day, I have students that are engaging in decoding practice using a variety of resources, working at the mono or multisyllabic level. We do work around morphology, vocabulary work. We use the heart word approach for working on those sight words. We do a ton with oral reading fluency and comprehension. If it's a spelling day, then the students are engaging in encoding practice and they're using like phoneme graphing mapping, or they're working with dry erase boards, working with syllabication, studying prefix and suffixes, and again, working with that heart word approach for learning those sight words as well. And our ending result, I guess, is more of like a dictation type of activity. I progress monitor my students every single week. So I'm either doing this through word reading activities, through oral reading fluency measures, through spelling dictation, as well as some comprehension. So that's what we're doing in 5th and 6th grade. And Carrie?
Yeah, I take over kind of where Dr. Lombard has left off. So in 7th and 8th grade, we have a very similar structure class. A little bit smaller. It's only, whereas 5th and 6th grade are co-taught, for 7th and 8th grade, it's just me. These are students that in 7th and 8th grade are only students identified with a very severe reading disability. I have about 10 kids in each of my classes. And I really pick up wherever they have left off the year before. Our program is very scripted to what our students need, very specific to their specific needs. When they're ready to move on as a group, we move on. So I really have the same breakup of spelling and reading days. I back off on some of my instruction. So Laura Lynn and her group do a really great job of that phonological awareness. I have no need to be doing that with my 7th and 8th graders. They are masters at it by the time they come in and see me. I build in a lot more Latin words in the 7th and 8th grade. They're experiencing a lot more complex text in their classes, where they're seeing these words with these bases that in English, in spoken English, they're not carrying meaning in our day-to-day language. So we focus a lot on what they're going to be seeing in authentic text in their classrooms. We also in 8th grade back off on our the level of explicit reading we do, because our 8th graders, what I've been finding the past 2 years is they are blowing through the word level reading activities we're doing, but it's really the spelling where they're needing a lot more of that focus and a lot more of our time. 7th grade, I work on a lot more of the controlled text, whereas in 8th grade, we are practicing, I'm pulling either novels from their classrooms. They just wrapped up Romeo and Juliet. So we were practicing our skills that they're learning with me, with the texts that they're using in class. They're identifying those words that they're practicing with me in class. Overall, I think outcomes so far that we've seen for both of our classes, is this our 4th year?
Third, yeah, fourth.
I think we've had 3 full years. I think we're into our 4th year, or we're into our 3rd year. Yeah. Time flies. But we've seen some really great outcomes so far. Quantitatively, because we are data keepers, just like Laura Lynn, my students, I take data weekly on their reading and their spelling, because we have to every day. We kind of know what we're going to teach the next day, but we don't exactly know what we will teach the next day until that other day has happened. So what happened today in my class will drive what we do tomorrow in instruction, if we're moving forward, if we're revisiting the skill, or we're ready to progress. So we have to collect data. We have to know exactly how the students are doing. We can't just say, that felt good. So quantitatively, we have a lot of data just within our classroom, but also looking overall at our school. What we have found is that 50% of the students in our program have moved from well below or below average to at or above average on our district-wide assessments. So this is our gen ed assessments. These are the assessments we have the whole entire school take. So half of the students in our program are already moving at or above average percentiles with testing that their peers are taking. And then within our classroom, 100% of the students are showing growth month over month and then year over year. So everyone's making progress. It's a very individual to each student. Anecdotally, the students are seeing their success. They're telling us the success. We see students being more successful. We have classroom teachers telling us, hey, the student who would look down at their desk in social studies is now actually raising their hand and offering to read a passage from the text that we're reading in class. So we're seeing live growth in our classroom, where our students are more willing to raise their hand or more willing to take over and teach for us for a day. But it's trickling into the classrooms where their confidence they're building with us, they're now applying it in their other classrooms, which I think for us is the biggest win besides our data.
Yeah, there are a couple pieces from what you talked about that I want to make sure we hit on again later. One is what you were just saying about the confidence piece and the kind of social emotional aspect of all of this. And then the other is that responsiveness, that everything is tailored to student need, and that then instruction is planned in response to student need as well. But so we're going to get to all of that. I have one sort of clarifying question that I'm seeing in the chat that I want to ask you. So someone asked, how many times and minutes does the structured literacy class meet per week? And I would assume that's like per grade level. So like if you're a 5th grader, for instance.
So both, yeah, sure. So both 5th and 6th grade, those students are receiving structured literacy 4 days a week for 45 minutes. And so that's often written into their IEPs now. But that's really what's happening for 5th and 6th grade. We don't have block scheduling for 5th and 6th grade, so it's a very predictable schedule for our students. Whereas in 7th and 8th grade,
I see my students 3 days a week for 45 minutes and then 1 day a week for 90 minutes, because we do have a split block schedule at our school. So our kids are seeing us very frequently for a pretty decent chunk of time.
Great. I'm seeing a ton of questions in the chat, and I think almost all of them are things we're already planning to get to. So I'm feeling great about that. So we'll just keep going, and then I'll come back and see if there are things that we need to hit on later. So can we back up a little bit, and can you tell me how all of this got started, and what was it that, like, what student needs were you seeing, or what other changes were going on where you said, okay, this is something that we need to change our approach to how we're doing this?
So I can start. So this is my 9th year at Bow Memorial School, and I started off as a special educator. And so my jam is teaching reading, right? So I, was kind of really involved in providing that direct instruction to students with a variety of needs in my role as a special educator. And then I switched to being the reading specialist for the building. And so for me, overseeing all of the reading data for the building, providing instruction to students that are really receiving that tier 2 or tier 3, instruction, overseeing like our general ed curriculum and making sure that the students and the teachers have the materials that they need, and budget and all of those pieces that go into being a reading specialist. What I found several years ago is that there was a need for a lot of students requiring that one-on-one or very small group type of instruction. And it was across all grade levels. So I was finding myself one part of my day in 5th grade and then another part in 8th grade, and then going back down to 5th grade to try to meet the needs of those students. We have a designated win block which is what I need for 5th and 6th grade. And so that was typically a place where students in 5th or 6th grade could go if they need either tier 2 support or potentially IEP services. And what was happening is I was getting kind of a mishmash of needs in each of those groups. So I might have a student that has decoding issues, but then also someone who's really struggling with comprehension, who's a strong decoder. But because that was the block that I had, it was really hard to provide really solid instruction to those students. The other thing that I was finding that students that were receiving that one-on-one instruction were very small. They didn't like it, right? They weren't with their peers. They I kind of think of myself as a really fun teacher, and I, hope that they get excited to work with me. But at the end of the day, they really wanted to be with peers, right? And, learning is a very social experience. So, I was trying to figure out, like, this is not an efficient and sustainable way of providing instruction. I was going, it was really exhausting. And, again, I was very dedicated to providing that instruction, but I was just feeling that there's got to be a different way. And then one day I was listening to the Reading League and I heard a podcast with Dr. Julie Brown from Vermont. And lo and behold, I'm originally, not originally, but I lived in Vermont for several years. So I knew of Dr. Brown, and I got really excited about the work that she was doing up in Vermont around structured literacy, more at the high school level. And so I was thinking about that. And I was like, I wonder if we could do that at our middle school. So Carrie and I do a lot of trail running together. And believe it or not, when we're out on our runs, we talk about reading. I know it's kind of geeky, but we do. And so I kind of pitched the idea to Carrie, and I was like, hey, what if we try something like this at our middle school? And after many miles of running, she kind of got on board, and then we pitched the idea to administration. And so, and that was, months in the work, right? Of just really thinking about how could we do this? What are some of the obstacles? What are the things that have to be in play? Carrie and I had, online Zoom calls with Dr. Brown and the teachers up in Woodstock, and trying to figure out a way that we could do this in Bow. And so that was kind of our first year, was just like that initial planning. And then I don't know.
Yeah, I think another piece for us too is talking, and Laurelyn touched on it, was we think we're cool as teachers and we want our students to like us, but it's not elementary school anymore. When your specialist comes up to pick you up from class and it's exciting and you want to go with them and you skip down the hallway, it's dread when that specialist comes to your door, or you have to leave class when the other students are there. Middle schoolers, they are deep in self-awareness, right? Mm-hmm. So the spotlight is shining on them. That's what they think, whether it is or not. So we really looked at this of, are we really providing dignity to our students? Are we giving them the best learning space? Because we have to give them a space where they're going to learn, but we also have to give them a space where they are willing to learn, where they want to learn, and where they feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. So dignity was a huge driving factor for us. So we decided, how can we make the most seamless way for them to get into our classrooms that seemed, and receive these services that seemed mm-hmm. seamless from one class to the next. So we decided we would make that a big part of our culture. So a big part of when our students first came into us was building the culture of our students. They're very much so understand why they are with us. We have small groups, so our classes are about 10 students. It is part of their day. So like my 7th and 8th graders, it is built into their daily schedule. Some mm-hmm. of their peers are going to math at that period, or to French, or to geometry, or wherever. They're coming to reading with me. Mm-hmm. And the same thing for Dr. L. They have a specific time in their day, so they're not necessarily missing out on huge chunks of their gen ed mm-hmm. classes. They're coming to us as part of their day. It's like, all right, see you later. I'm going to another class. Mm-hmm. Their peers don't know, mm-hmm. and they feel comfortable. They know that they're in that room with 9 other kids that have the same exact struggles as them. So that fear of, oh, someone's going to make fun of me, has really gone away. We make it really clear that there's no targeting, there's no bullying. Students eventually become really comfortable of just oh, hey, the word was said, it's said this way, it's pronounced this, of correcting each other. And they're so comfortable with that. So they really get to practice those skills that they are terrified to practice in class with us. We've provided that safe space for them. And that was one of our really big driving factors. We've had a couple kids say things to us like, I feel really safe reading in your class, or I don't feel afraid to read out loud. I had a student recently who was discussing with me, he's an 8th grader. He's like, I cannot be pulled out for speech and OT anymore. I'm missing out on science. I'm missing out on language arts. But I want to stay with you. I want to continue to come to your class because I know that I need it, but I'm not missing out on the content of my other classes. So even our students are starting to understand when I'm missing out on general education, it really in middle school and high school is really impacting my progress in that class, even though I need these skills.
I want to just go back to that first year though. When Carrie and I first pitched the idea to our administration, Carrie already had a designated class for 7th and 8th grade. And so for the two of us, we're like, let's pilot it that year. So that first year, it was just in 7th and then 8th grade class. So the two of us, we co-taught together for that 1 year, and we loved it. We would twin on Tuesdays with same outfits, and we just tried to make it really fun for the kids. But the idea was that it was not going to be a sustainable thing for Carrie and I to co-teach together indefinitely. So that was that first year, and then moving on, we've moved it down to the 5th and 6th grade. And so I think for me, what the most exciting piece is I could have a student that potentially could receive this type of instruction 5th through 8th grade. We have a system in place for them. And if they don't need that, we have other plans for those students. And we have other opportunities for them to receive that direct reading instruction that's needed. But we're very proud of kind of the model that we've created here at the middle school.
I want to ask one more quick clarifying question before I move on to some. A lot of people have questions about sort of like how this all works in the schedule, which makes total sense because it's a kind of a unique model. So a couple people asked whether this is the ELA class for these students or whether they are also getting ELA instruction, and they are getting ELA instruction and then this class as well. And so, can you just speak quickly about how that all works out in the schedule? Like, because they're in this class, are they what is it that they are taking this class in lieu of?
Sure.
7th and 8th grade misses nothing.
Yeah. And they get that 7th and 8th grade, they get this class in addition to their general English language arts curriculum. 5th grade, what they're missing is the silent reading and vocabulary work, So our students are coming to us for that beginning 45 minutes of that instruction. So they're walking back into class and they're continuing into whatever's happening in their general ed classroom. And it's the same for 6th, although I will say in 6th grade, because of how our schedule is working for this year, they are with me for, a little bit longer. So when they're entering back into their ELA class, it's probably writing that they're getting into. So we're doing a majority of the reading with me this year, which sometimes doesn't feel great, but I also know that this is really what they need. And I am fine giving them that instruction.
And the 7th and 8th graders, am I right in remembering that they're taking this, it would be instead of a foreign language class, or is that a different class that I'm thinking
about?
So
7th and 8th graders in our school have the option to take a foreign language, either French or Spanish. And then the other option would be an additional reading class. So all students take language arts, but there's another teacher in our school who does general education reading, and she does more like really in-depth novel connections and creative writing. So it's in addition to language arts as well, but that's gen ed. So those would be their 3 options. So if they don't take those, and previous to this model, in the years previous, we were pulling students from, they were not getting social studies. So in 7th and 8th grade, we were like, what can we pull? And so unfortunately, we were pulling our 7th and 8th graders from social studies. So our 7th graders were not getting social studies in the past, but this model allowed us to put this into their day.
So they're not getting pulled from social studies anymore.
Correct. Nope.
Yeah. Okay. So then the other, we have a couple questions about this in the chat too, but this was something I was hoping to talk about as well, which is, who are the students who are in this class? So we have people in the chat who are saying, is this a special education class, or is this for students who are not in special education, but are receiving reading interventions? And how do you identify them? And it's kind of a combination of all of the above, right? And can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I can speak. So last year, so for the 5th and 6th grade group, right? So how we figure out which students is that kind of where your question is going?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And whether it's specifically a special education class
Sure.
or something different.
Yeah. So last year for fifth grade, so when that was the first year so we're in our second year of doing fifth and sixth grade structured literacy. So I have a transition meeting at the end of, we start kind of talking about it February, March with incoming fifth graders. So I go down to the elementary school and I talk to teachers about every single kid that's going to be coming up. And that's my job as the reading specialist. So like, look at, okay, who are our students that are going to be coming in? I have very specific criteria of the type of student that would fit into this structured literacy class, right? Because we know that that's now an option for these students to enter. It doesn't always have to be a student that is on an IEP. It could potentially be a student that has, pretty significant tier 2 needs, and there's potentially going to be a potential referral. And so, and that was definitely more last year because we have such a large cohort this year. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to take in kind of those tier 2 kids this year, but last year I had 3 students. Again, I'm looking at data. Our district, we have something called a Kid Grid, and we're moving into Branching Minds, which is a program of kind of like a data warehouse. So we're looking at all of our data across the board for fifth, all the way up now into high school. But when I'm thinking about the students that are going to come to the fifth grade structured literacy class, they really need to have a word level deficit, right? These are the students that have been receiving instruction. They may be struggling with fluency. They may not have decoding. Maybe these are students that have had Wilson instruction or in Gillingham. They're using the UFly program now at the elementary school. So the teachers down there have incredible amounts of data. So at any given point, you could call up and say, hey, how is so-and-so doing? And they're going to be able to pull up this information. So we're really, really selective of the type of student or their profile, I should say, should come into this class, because if they are not fitting that profile, they're going to be absolutely bored and it's not going to meet their needs, right? So that's the students that are coming into fifth grade. Now, heading into sixth grade, I already kind of know the kids that are going to potentially need this, right? Last year, with the students that were in tier 2, we put them into the structured literacy class, and it was like tier 2 plus, right? Because they were getting this for, every single or 4 days a week. All of those kids are reading, or 2 of the 3 are reading above grade level now. Their spelling is still, a bit of a struggle, but they're not even on my radar as of students that potentially could need a potential special education referral, right? In sixth grade, we already know those kids, but we have also exited students. So moving into, seventh grade, last year, we looked at several of our students that were receiving explicit instruction in the structured literacy. They exited, they demonstrated proficiency in these skills, and we were like, okay, great. And so that's where those students might go into that reading class that Carrie just mentioned briefly. And I'll talk more about that after, because that's that's another additional thing that we're doing this year, piloting. But Carrie, we already know typically the students that are going to enter into seventh grade based on the data, based on their instruction that we've had. And again, looking at their 3-year evaluation, do they still need this type of instruction? Looking at, the data that I've been collecting, yeah, this is a student that will still continue to need that explicit systematic instruction of structured literacy.
Yes, 7th and 8th grade, they just roll up, as Laura Lynn said. We already know. So 7th and 8th grade, it is just students on an IEP, and those are our students that are in the lowest, lower percentiles, typically single digit, maybe in the teens in percentiles when we look at their norms, and we're doing assessments with them. And these are students that have identified services on their IEP for a lot of students with dyslexia. So it's much smaller in 7th and 8th grade. And every year the classes get a little bit smaller, which means our program is working, right? So from 7th to 8th grade, even my students, I might have a student in 7th grade. The next year I'm like, oh, you are ready to be more into a gen ed classroom where you are practicing these skills. You're meeting average benchmarks. So yeah, that's kind of where we came from.
The other piece too, I should just clarify is, we still could potentially have a student that still needs that one-to-one instruction, right? This is not a one-size-fits-all program. And I think that's really important to consider when folks are thinking about this, right? So we have students that still receive, instruction in Wilson or Orton Gillingham or whatever program that might meet their needs in a more one-to-one setting. But what I will say as the reading specialist in my building, because I'm providing this structured literacy now, that win time that I talked about earlier, that 5th and 6th grade time, it's more available for students that are needing more comprehension, vocabulary, or fluency work, right? I don't need to spend time teaching those decoding skills. So the groups that I'm forming that might need tier 2, and sometimes it's a student that's on an IEP but doesn't need that decoding practice, they need more of that comprehension or fluency, I'm able to provide that instruction during that time. So it's lovely for me as a practitioner to know that I have a group of students now that all have similar needs, as opposed to, oh my gosh, how do I do this? So it feels very good and very satisfying in terms of my instruction of how to meet the needs of these students.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're also getting a lot of questions about materials. So
about what? I'm sorry?
A lot of questions about materials.
Okay.
People want to know, are you using a program? Are you bringing together lots of different pieces of things? If you're comfortable sharing the specific names of things that you're using, I think it's from the questions, it seems that folks would be interested, but, or if you want to speak in more general terms, that's fine too. But yeah, what are the materials that you're using?
Yeah, this was also a huge driving factor in why we created this program. As everyone knows, there are so many materials out there for that K3 range. And then as we get 4th and 5th, they kind of pewter off. And then it's like, oh, well, especially in high school, we expect you can read. There wasn't much out there for our middle and high school students. So we went through what we knew was out there. We are very, very devout followers of science of reading. So we wanted to make sure we pulled some resources. So when we started the program off, and this was part of us selling it to our district of why they should let us do that, is we were going to pull from what we had. We already knew we had some really great resources in our building. So we wanted to save time, use what we already had and put it into practice in the model that we had looked at making. So we started out small, just a couple pieces. We didn't want to overwhelm ourselves. And we did this really small in the very beginning. We were inspired by Dr. Julie Brown. We used a lot of Wilson reading materials because our school had them. We didn't have to go out and rebuy new materials because when we had pitched this to our district, we started pitching it in like early winter, and we wanted to start it the following fall. Budgets were done and closed. There was no money for us. So we had to know how to do this savvy, and teachers are savvy. We know how to pull material. So, and then a couple of Kilpatrick's items. So we started out small, and each year we've refined of what else can we pull in, what should we remove. Some of the other programs that we use a lot, Catherine Grace's phoneme grapheme mapping. We were inspired by a lot of her work that shows up in letters training as well. UFly, we use resources from UFly and Morphine Magic. Dibbles, Orton Gillingham. The Reading League puts out so many good resources. We really make sure that anything that we are using is not, it doesn't just say, oh, we're backed by science of research, or we're inspired by the science of research, because anyone can say that. And we have unfortunately run into our district and other districts of publishers selling themselves as, oh, this is science of reading. It's just been relabeled. It's their program relabeled. So we really have to, as educators, crack down, go through the materials first and make sure, is this following what we know? The science we know, are these materials following that? Writing wise, we pull in some Think SRSD. And then for reading, the Reading Comprehension Blueprint has been really helpful in my 7th and 8th grade as well. We are, like I said, super, super selective. Laurelyn and I meet together every summer after the school year has ended, and we reflect, how did this year go? What materials were a total win and we should keep? What do we need to continue to tweak for our specific program? And what do we need to get rid of? And we do it very slowly. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves. We don't want to overwhelm our students, and we don't want to, we try not to change anything in the middle of the school year because it doesn't let us see what was effective.
I would also say too, not we all, but a lot of us in our district, or in our district, have received the letters training. And so within that, we'll be like, oh my gosh, that's an awesome resource. Can we use that?
The spelling screener is a huge one.
So a lot of, one of the other things I meant to share is, at the beginning of the year for me in 5th and 6th grade, I spend the first week or two collecting baseline data on my students. And so I love using the letters spelling screener. I love using the letters word reading assessment. I do an oral reading fluency measure using the Dibbles. I do a maze. So I collect this information at the beginning of the year to kind of also make sure that the students that we've identified really truly do have a word level deficit, right? Because there are times when, like, we may say a student moving up to 5th grade, yeah, they're going to need this, but for some reason they miraculously in the fall, they have become solid readers and they don't need this instruction, right? So it doesn't happen often, but once in a while. So I really want to make sure I have that baseline data. And also with these new 5th graders, I want to read with them. I want to spend some time with them, get to know them as a learner, explain who I am, what I'm going to be doing. And then I use that measure again, potentially in the winter and then also in the spring. So I have, three kind of benchmark assessments that I'm using to kind of determine whether this instruction is working or not, in addition to all of our progress monitoring. But I do think that the letters professional development for us as a district has been amazing. The New Hampshire Department of Education is super supportive of that. They really, promoted that, and we've had a lot of buy-in from our teachers. And what I love as a reading specialist in my building, we're all speaking the same language, right? We're all using similar keywords. We're all, talking about reading in the same way. And I think that's a really important piece to consider. This is not a compartmentalized type of approach, right? Mm-hmm. I, at any point, can go in and talk to, a 6th grade teacher or a 5th grade teacher and say, hey, this is what we're working. This is what we're doing in our instruction. And they're like, oh yeah, I can see this in their spelling or in their writing. So it's made it so easy for us. It's almost like I take that for granted that language is so common now amongst our teachers. And it wasn't like that years ago. We've worked really hard to get there. So.
Mm-hmm. We have, I maybe have never seen so many questions come into the chat during one of these conversations. But what I was going to say is that a lot of them are quite specific. And so what I'm going to do now, we still have a few more minutes left before we have to turn it over to the next session. But what I'm going to do now is put your contact email that you've shared with me in the chat so that folks who have specific questions about types of assessments, types of materials, what lesson plans look like, all of that can reach out directly, and maybe we can try to tackle a few more kind of broad organizational pieces of what this all looks like for now. So I'm going to put that in the chat. Okay, that should have come through. I am seeing a couple of questions about involving the community and getting parents on board, which I know is something we had talked about when I worked on the story. And I was wondering if I could ask about that a little bit. So there's some people asking, how do you communicate about the program to families, and how do you communicate to them about student progress?
Yeah. So, you want to?
Okay. So, we had to really, really, really sell this to our district. Well, I wouldn't say really that many times. There were many.
In case they're listening, they were big.
Well, they're all background educators, right? But to us walk in and say, hey, we want to do this program. So first we had to get our district buy-in. We went through some hoops to do that. Eventually, everyone was all on board and like super excited for us. And they gave us a green light. They're like, run with this. And within the first few months, part of that was you need to present to the school board because this is a financial cost, right? So 2 highly qualified educators in one room, where we were kind of stepping away from what we were normally doing. So we went to our board and we presented to our board after a few months. I think it was in like the midwinter after the first year that we started it. And the parents, let me back up a smidge. Once we got the program going, the parents knew. So we told all of the parents that were going to be in our pilot program. Your children are in safe hands. Many of them had already had Dr. L. Some of them had had me for 1 year. They knew who we were. They trusted us with their children already. They knew that they were going to be getting these services. So the parents, we educated them on what we were hoping to be doing, how we were going to refine their reading services. We explained to our parents what the science of reading is, what will structured literacy look like. We went through lesson plans with them. We showed them material. So we showed our parents what their children were going to be getting. We then checked throughout the school year, not only for feedback from our students, but from the parents. Like we did Google Forms, we had one-on-one meetings. Give us the feedback. What are you seeing at home? What are the conversations you're having with your student? Are you seeing the progress that we think we're seeing? And And we had really good trusting relationships with those parents. We went to the board, we presented it to the board where we had some student and parent input. We had a lot of parents that were really so excited for what was happening with their students. And our parents supported us so much. I think that was a really big part of the early on success for us. We have great parents, but the parents that were just like, yeah, this could be something good, were blown away. They were so excited to see how comfortable and safe and excited for reading their students were seeing. From there, that first year, we kind of joked that our 7th grade class was like the zoo. We had all the professionals that we knew and local outside agencies wanted to come in. So we had like the Department of Ed wanted to come in. We had teachers from our elementary school and our high school and our neighboring districts. Hey, we heard about this program. Could we come see it in action? Our principal would sit in and he would learn. He's like, I didn't know about syllables like that. So it was really fun because the kids were seeing the excitement of the adults around them and in the community. Parents talk within communities, as you know that. So parents would be like, hey, I heard that so-and-so is in this reading program. Is my child eligible for that? And we would explain why or why not they might not be eligible. So it just became more and more known about in our community, what was happening in our classroom and what services were being provided. We educate our parents when we're in either tier 2 meetings with our parents or we're in an IEP and we're presenting this as a new service. We describe in detail what this program looks like, what will their services look like, and how are we accessing this education for their child.
I think you touched on that in your story, Sarah, with one parent in particular. I was selling it to them at their IEP meeting for their son, and she's like, I don't know, because he had been receiving one-on-one instruction. And, she was so supportive after, that.
Said, I'll give it 6 weeks.
She's like, I'll give it 6 weeks, but then we're going to go back to you, Dr. L. And I was like, no, we can do this. And so I think it's just being very transparent with families. For me, when we have open house, I'm there and explaining what structured literacy is. At any point, I'd like to go to IEP meetings for my students or tier 2. I always say I'm like the biggest cheerleader for this type of instruction. And I'm pretty, excited and passionate about what I'm doing. And, my poor husband, we went out to dinner last night and I was like, oh, you want to talk about reading to some, to an old high school friend. And I'm just like, I would love to talk about that. Like for us, our enthusiasm, I think, is one way to be able to communicate that, right?
We've also done some professional developments. Our school does un-PD days where the teachers present their own PD. So we pitched, hey, can we present this? So it was super cool. From elementary to high school, we had like science teachers and geometry teachers and foreign language teachers coming in to learn. They've heard about our program. They know that we're a very open district and sharing and cheering each other on. So they came in, well, I want to know about reading. How can I implement these reading skills in my classroom? If it's working for this small subset of students, how can I put this into science? How can even the language arts teachers, what can I do better in my classroom? Just getting inspired. And then we were also invited because we had people coming through. We've been invited to present at several different workshops just within the state of New Hampshire, just sharing what we're doing and conferences of what we're doing and how it's possible to be done in other districts.
We only have a couple minutes left, which I'm sad about because there's so much more we could cover.
I could talk about this all day. I truly could. I love it. Yes.
But I want to ask about what's next for you all, and if you want to talk a little bit about the 7th grade reading class.
Sure.
We have like 3 minutes left, so whatever you want to highlight is fine.
So real quick, structured literacy now is a very strong force within our building, and I feel very good about it. And what next? We're going to continue to work on that, right? We're going to continue to refine those skills. Carrie and I are continuing to talk with the other special educators that we work with. I don't think I'll ever get to co-teach with Carrie again, but that's okay. I still see her. We get to still do runs together and we still talk about this. For me, I was like, now what? We have a 7th grade class, right? That Carrie had mentioned is taught by a general ed teacher that's reading in addition to their ELA. And so I pitched the idea last spring. I was like, how about I co-teach that with, Allie Stewart? And she is, providing instruction to more general ed 7th grade students. Some of those kids are IEP student, that have IEPs. Some of those kids have tier 2. And so I work with her daily and we're doing oral reading fluency. We are working on vocabulary, working on comprehension. And so we are targeting that group of students that really needs that additional reading support, but not at that word level.
It's like that middle level.
It's that
And
middle
to
level.
clarify
And
for everyone listening, that is a separate class than the structured literacy classes.
Yeah.
So it's a separate reading class that can provide some additional support as well, but as Laurelyn, as you were just saying, not at that word level.
And in our school, that's the one that that period would be the class that they could take if they were not taking a foreign language or taking if they weren't taking a foreign language, or in my classroom.
The other piece for us as practitioners and cheerleaders for this, one of the things that we are trying to figure out is how to help other districts do this. It's doable, right? It seems really daunting, but I feel that we've been doing this for several years now, and so we're just trying to figure out a way to promote this and support others that are wanting to do this. So that's why we have thank you for sharing our email. We're looking to provide some professional development around that. We're just not sure how that's going to look yet. But if that's something that folks are interested in, to have them email us, because it is, we've already had several meetings with people across the country since the article came out. And by the way, Sarah, thank you. It was a beautifully written article. Several of my students said that they just felt so good they said it was the best day of their life when you were in their classroom. And I asked them why, and they said, because someone actually cares about what we're learning. And that was unprovoked. That was a 7th grader in that general ed class. And she's like, I didn't think people really cared about what we're learning. I'm like, oh boy, do they know now, right? Because I was like, this has been just an amazing experience for us as teachers and our community. And thank you very much for writing such a lovely article about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, just one small thing for me to add in would be the feasibility of this. Laurelyn and I both have worked in other resources, and I know that some of the questions we get asked often is, can any district do this? And I really want to make it super clear is that what it would take to do this is not a well-resourced, wealthy district with endless resources. It takes teachers who are willing to put in the effort to address the needs for the student. It is a big lift, but if you're a dedicated teacher, you can do it. And it's really those teachers that are going to trust and understand the science of reading. So it's not a huge financial burden to a district. And we joke that we're going to work ourselves out of a job because we're requiring less services for our students. We know that need will be somewhere else, but this is such a feasible outline of a class for any district at any level. Title I to the most resourced school possible. Any district in a classroom could implement a program like what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk with us and share all of this with everyone on the Zoom right now. A couple of logistical questions that people were asking. If you want to read the article that about the work going on in Bow, it's linked in the resources tab. The recording of this is going to be available later for everyone who has registered. But I just want to say thank you both so much, Laurelyn and Carrie. And anyone who wants to reach out to them, their email is in the chat. So
thank you again, Sarah. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much for that engaging discussion, Sarah, Carrie, and Laura Lynn. I know I speak for all of us at Education Week that we love Sarah's article. She was super excited to share it with us, and I know that the nation is just eating it up. So really great to see the work that you guys have started in New Hampshire and seeing how that's going to scale. So next up, we're going to hear from another one of our sponsors, the 95% Group. So they are an educational publishing company whose mission is to build on science to empower teachers with the knowledge, resources, and support they need to develop strong readers. And they use a structured literacy approach that companies' 195 literacy ecosystem integrates proven resources and professional learning into one cohesive system. So you can have all tiers of instruction delivering on the same promise to get that 95% or more of students being able to read. So bringing in the expert herself and one of their literacy leaders, I'd like to welcome Terry Nolan to the stage, and she's going to give us a couple insights on their call to reimagine how we equip adolescent readers. So welcome, Terry.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thank you, EdWeek, for putting on this important topic. I know, like has been said so many times, we've had this major focus on early literacy, and our secondary is our last best chance to make sure that we are doing whatever we can to make it right for so many children. So in addition to many things that I do, one of the things I do is tutor children. And I remember the day that Barrett and his mom walked into my office. And I remember it so profoundly is because in our previous phone call conversation with mom, she was in tears. Now, I have talked to many parents in tears, so have you. And when they came into my office, we know how mom was. She was in tears again. And Barrett was like this. You know, that stance of, I don't know why we're here. What are we doing, Mom? Why did you drag me here? And at that moment in Barrett's life, he was exiting elementary school, moving into middle school. And he had been engaging in self-harm and to the point of on the verge of developing eating disorder, crying so profusely on the way to school. And it was all because he had gone through the struggles of, I'm not like everybody else. I am not reading like everybody else. What is wrong with me? And those of us that know these kids know that they are looking around saying, what's wrong with me? How come they're getting it and I'm not? So I started working with Barrett and spent many years tutoring him and doing everything that Laura Lynn and Carrie were just talking about, that intervention that's critical. So today, what I want to share with you, though, is really reimagining what we can do in secondary. That intervention is critical, but we also need to be distributing responsibility for so many students to be able to get literacy in every place and space. There's such an urgency and there's such a call in this matter for students like Barrett, for students because we do know the behaviors start to happen, that disengagement starts to happen, and bringing those kids back around is a lot harder task than in elementary school because of that self-awareness that starts to kick in for students. So that urgency is there. Reed Lyon, from many of you may know Reed. He is an icon in the reading space, but he stated these statistics that of the 70% of children that struggle with reading, 95% of those are because of instructional or curriculum casualties. Those students that did not get the foundational skills, a lot of what we've been talking about in elementary, so they've got those gaps. And because reading is a developmental process, then those gaps are missing, just like the potholes on the highway. It's not a smooth ride. And here's what I say about that when they get to us in middle school and high school is this is not a moment for saying, well, they should have done that in elementary school. This is a moment to say, okay, we know the problem, but we also know what the promise is. See, there's a distance between the problem and the promise. And that distance can be really, really big. In fact, the poll at the beginning showed us that that distance is really big in some of your context. And us, it is our responsibility to close that distance between the problem and the promise. So one of the problems is the foundational skills. And Laura Lynn and Carrie, I'm going to tell you what, Bo, middle school, like you're rocking it. That was a brilliant example of what can be done to engage in those skills deficit for students. But what I'm going to talk about today is what we can do at large. And the very first thing that we need to do is to make sure that literacy, reading, language is happening in every place and space in our buildings. And so it is this distributed responsibility across all content areas. It is saying everyone is a reading teacher? Now, I'm going to tell you what, that's a big statement. We've all heard it before, but what does that mean? Oh my goodness. See, for students that do need skill gap closure, we got to turn to our interventionists. We got to return to our specialists. We have to turn to individuals that know how to do those things. But when they are also in history class, ELA class, science class, math class, what can we do in order to lift students? See, and sometimes we even look to ELA teachers and say, well, shouldn't that be your job to fix what the problem is? But think about it. ELA teachers sometimes aren't reading teachers. ELA teachers are trained, educated. Their expertise is how to teach you to annotate text or to find the main idea. That's different than being a reading teacher. You know, this idea of this distribution of reading across all content areas, you know, our places, our buildings that are our schools where children show up every single day, we demand that children learn. We demand it. We demand it because of grades. We demand it because that's what it's designed to do, right? It is an institution of learning. It's a learning palace for children to come and get educated. If we expect that of our kids, we should expect that of us, the ones that are doing the education and the teaching of the learning. We got to demand it of us as well. So let me go into then what does that mean? Let's distribute it across all content areas. But how do we do that? What does that look like? Well, this is encapsulated by all of your responses right at the beginning with the polls. Like, come on, you are the ones that you got it. But now we got to share it with all those that aren't on this webinar today. And it's what we call the heavy hitters. Okay, so there's 3 heavy hitters when it comes to what can we do across all content areas. And the very first one, vocabulary instruction. Now, this isn't new news. Like, come on, we've been doing vocabulary instruction. Here's where I want to push the limits of what we mean around vocabulary instruction. So teaching kids new vocabulary words and their definitions to memorize them and to answer and fill in the blank, multiple choice for a quiz later on, that doesn't do anything to stick that learning. We want to make learning stick. See, with vocabulary instruction, we need to make sure that we are incorporating oral language. Kids got to be able to say the words, put them in their own mouths. The best memory happens when I speak the word, when I use the word in a sentence, when I engage in discourse in the classroom through academic conversation. Because then it says, I know the word. I can use the word. I can make sure that that word is incorporated into my lexicon going forward. I got to speak it. And I want you to consider how audibly dynamic is your classroom. How audibly dynamic? What does that mean? What I mean is, what's the volume level? And I'm not talking about the screaming, the yelling, things like that. What I am talking about is students talking, not the teacher talking. So vocabulary, we've got to incorporate language routines with that vocabulary instruction. Second heavy hitter is multisyllabic decoding. We've mentioned this already. I think it was Amy in the chat. Multisyllabic decoding. So there is great reliability in our language, even though there's kind of a myth out there that there's not, but there is great reliability. And if we can help educate content area teachers in understanding the syllable types, in understanding the patterns, identifying root words, base words, short vowels, those things, that could be an easy training, professional learning session that happens that can start to be incorporated. And now in history class, when we look at the word colonization, I got some tactics. When in science class, I look at the word electromagnetism. Okay, I can really start to break that word down, multisyllabic decoding. The number 3 heavy hitter, morphology. Morphology referring to the parts of words or words themselves that carry meaning. The prefixes, the suffixes, the root and base words, morphology, the meaning that is attached to words, and then how even a simple little prefix like un, what does it do to change the meaning of the word? See, all of this can be incorporated into what we are doing, because while students need that intervention to close gaps, we've got to lift language. We've got to lift the other areas of literacy in all other domains. I mean, this is a full out blitz moment. We can't leave it to the specialist to solve the problem. Your data at the beginning was too big. This is full court press moment. We've got to engage the entire staff to get this done. So Barrett, when I started to work with him and incorporate structured literacy, lifting language, oral language, all those things, that child's life was turned around. The self-harming behavior stopped. He got engaged in all these extracurricular activities at school, and he worked with his mom to be a mentor to elementary students that struggled with reading. See, we're changing lives here. So I want you to remember the 3 heavy hitters that can help accelerate this process: vocabulary, multisyllabic decoding, morphology. And if you want a good little way to remember that, VMM, vocabulary, multisyllabic decoding, and morphology. Boom. Okay, come on. It's an easy way to remember it. It's our responsibility as secondary literacy leaders to say, what are we going to do with the potential of students? We have an opportunity to make it just multiply, to compound it, or to compress it. What are we going to do? We have an opportunity to lift this work into the next evolution for students. Thanks so much, Ryan and the EdWeek team.
Yeah, thank you to Terry. I know that story really touched my heart, and learning a little bit more about VMM, that'll stick with me. I'm not going to try and pronounce all of that quite yet, but thanks so much to the 95% group for sponsoring today's event. And so as we move into our next panel discussion, we're going to bring up Education Week staff writer Caitlin Pete Stevens. She actually happens to be the current owner of the EdWeek Holiday Ugly Sweater Contest Award. And she's going to be bringing up the Senior Relationship Specialist and Secondary Literacy Training Facilitator at AIM Institute, Carolyn Durante, the Marietta City Schools in Georgia's Science of Reading Director, Mary Hannah Gaddis, and the Deputy Superintendent, Charles Gardner. They're going to come to the virtual stage and really give us a great discussion on how districts are currently investing in their teacher knowledge. So welcome, Caitlin, Carolyn, Mary, and Charles.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Well, I don't know why he had to out me as the ugliest sweater winner, but there we are. I am honored to have that, but I'm even more honored to be here today and talking with our wonderful panelists. Just to set the stage a little bit before we dive in, as we've heard already today, secondary teachers generally don't have extensive training in reading, and many lack appropriate materials to do that instruction. In this session, we're going to dig into efforts to support secondary teachers so that they understand what they can do to improve reading outcomes for students. We have an incredible lineup for our panel today with folks who have been hard at work to make sure teachers are prepared to support their students. I'll let them briefly introduce themselves as we get going, but Brian gave a quick overview, and just know they are pedigreed to be talking about this topic. We have folks both from the district side and the research and training development side. And so we have Charles and Mary Hannah here from the Marietta district in Georgia, where in recent years, they have, like many of you on this call today, focused on improving literacy achievement for their youngest students. But as they started to see progress, they also recognized that there were older students who were filtering up into older grades who were still struggling to read, either because they weren't in the system when, this real laser focus on early academic interventions had started, or they just made it, without the adequate reading proficiency that the district deems sufficient. So this district, they partnered with the AIM Institute with Carolyn to provide a comprehensive 55-hour training for teachers about how to implement these practices that we've been talking about all day long. The program builds off of another program that the AIM Institute has for teaching kindergarten through third grade students, but it has been adapted to be age appropriate and more comprehensive for older students and their instructors. So with the help from AIM, the Marietta District has gone all in and found success in helping all of their readers thrive. Okay, that's enough for me. Let's talk to the people who are much more knowledgeable and let them tell their story. So let's start with Charles. First up, let's just kind of set the scene. Can you talk a little bit about how your district came to this decision to invest in this training, because it is an investment of time and resources? And could you address, the gaps that you were seeing that led to that decision and what set AIM apart in selecting them?
Sure. Well, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here with you. To set the stage, 5 years ago, we started doing our really K3 work, which really morphed into K5 work through kind of a community partnership with an entity called the Atlanta Speech School. The initiative's called Literacy and Justice for All, and it was really focusing on like birth, even with our like birthing hospitals, like all the way through grade 5. And so in doing that, we really focused on building teacher knowledge first, because we believe that oftentimes what districts do is we'll put resources in front of teachers, and we expect the resource to make the difference. But we really believed in providing teacher knowledge and then providing coaching and like ongoing follow-up through something that we call a source cycle, where we are providing real-time job-embedded professional development and feedback, and real-time coaching feedback from instructional coaches and our science of reading facilitators to provide make sure that we're making that transition from acquiring the knowledge to that actually translating to practice, which of course is always one of the most challenging pieces of really any professional development initiative. So in doing that, we saw some just incredible gains. And so a few years ago, we saw gains that were 5 times the state of Georgia in third grade reading, and we've continued to build upon that and see that as these kids have matriculated up. Unfortunately, we had kids that were here before, and we do have some transiency in our district, right? And so what we saw is middle school students and high school students that are still struggling, right? And oftentimes secondary, and I'm sure y'all have talked about this today, secondary teachers are not necessarily equipped to teach reading, right? They don't have the same kind of pedagogical knowledge and training in their, in post-secondary as they're doing their teacher prep programs. And so we really saw a need to find a way to take what we had learned in our K5 journey and how do we apply that in a different way, right? But a similar way to make sure that those teachers have what they need. In doing that, we kind of went about, we engaged some experts like Margie Gillis at Literacy How, a variety of different folks. And we were trying to find out who is doing this work. And we met with a handful of folks across the country and national experts, and we found that there's not a lot of folks that have embarked in this work, right? And there's not a lot out there. And so we came across in some of those conversations, we came to be aware of AIM, the AIM Institute. And so our superintendent and a group of staff members and teachers actually flew up to see them and visited the school and saw what they were doing and realized that this was really a fit, and it was kind of what we were missing, because although we had kind of some packaged pedagogy, it was very much geared towards elementary learners and elementary educators. And so we needed to find something that we felt like still was rigorous and high quality, right? That we could fit into kind of our system of combining that instructional coaching with the knowledge building. And we thought AIM was the perfect partner. And we've worked with them. Mary Hannah and Carolyn have come and trained our teachers. We broke our teachers into 3 cohorts in middle school. And so we have our first cohort, which got the deepest dive. They went through all of the modules in 1 year. That was our reading teachers and our intervention teachers, special education, like those folks that are working with the kids that are the most at risk. And then our cohort 2 was our English language arts teachers. And then cohort 3 is everybody else. So really we are all in, and everybody we believe contributes to this work. In our district, we've literally had sound walls on school buses, right? Because we believe that everybody in the ecosystem really plays a part in these kids getting what they need. And so, yeah, I think that's a good kind of gives you a sense of like how we got to where we are today.
Perfect. Thanks. So let's bring Carolyn into the fold because you've been working on this and you're so passionate about it. Can you just kind of give the lay of the land, right? Like this is a pretty comprehensive and all-inclusive training. Can you talk a little bit about like how it's designed to address these really unique challenges and kind of maybe lay out some of the concepts that the course tackles?
Sure. So one, thank you for having me, and hi to everyone on here. I'm Dr. Carolyn Durante, and I am the Senior Relationship Manager at AIM, but the doctor is there because my dissertation and my own research is in foundational reading skills at the Tier 1 level in a content area classroom. It's been said there's not a lot of research in this area at all. And most of the research is in the intervention world, not how do we do this in science classes, social studies classes, history classes, math classes. And that's not to say that everyone's a reading teacher. That's kind of this like catch-all phrase that we're using. And we don't want the math teacher to be the reading teacher, but they need to be supporting students who are not yet accessing the complex text that we need them to access. So AIM's comprehensive course takes the 5 pillars right from the National Reading Panel and looks at what that means for adolescent learners, both at the middle school and the high school level. So do we want a math teacher doing phonemic awareness with L. Conan boxes? Absolutely not. But when we work with teachers, how do you bring in syllabication with your vocabulary content words? Or when we're thinking about decoding, and this is a very popular topic right now, we're teaching decoding through accessing morphemes and syllabication as well. And so when we worked with the teachers in Marietta and many other districts, it's how do you have a routine that can be embedded through all content areas so that teachers can work on those multisyllabic words. And it goes all the way up to fluency work. We know a lot of classrooms are silently reading, and so how do we embed strategies for partner reading or choral reading, as well as going up to sentence level work? That syntax piece is so critical. I always say I date myself when I talk about sentence diagramming, but there was a purpose back then, as well as the inferencing and the background knowledge that we need. So the course goes through all of the research. And I think it's important to say too, if you're not familiar with AIM, and Chuck, you just mentioned it, AIM is a school first for students with language-based learning disabilities outside the Philadelphia area. And so it was started by 2 moms who realized that the research to practice gap was about 20 years. And that's actually a child's whole lifetime in school. And so we're trying to close that gap so the research gets to classrooms faster. And so in the course and what Marietta City experiences, it's not just content and the research, but like what does that actually look like? And we use real students from AIM to demonstrate what that might look like, as well as the assessment piece is so critical. How do we provide that data and diagnostically prescriptive instruction?
Carolyn, I'm going to stay with you for a second.
Great.
Carolyn, just a note for our attendees. She has to duck just a couple minutes early out of the session because she has another presentation on the same thing back to back. So she's busy today. we were talking about this earlier in this webinar, right? Where we had a EdWeek Research Center survey just a little while back that showed, something like 38% of teachers, school leaders, and district leaders said they had not received any training on how to support middle and high school students who struggle with reading. But we are seeing more districts showing interest in bulking up their PD on this topic. And Carolyn, you and I have talked a lot about the importance of doing it the right way. Can you talk a little bit about the importance and some of the differences between taking a training designed for younger readers and not just using that, and how it's designed for these secondary students and educators?
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think one, we see people say, like, whatever's happening in K3, just do it in middle and high school. And like, they're different. And I think the two educators from New Hampshire even said, like, we have to consider the social emotional needs of students who have, in my opinion, been broken by a system year after year, and the things that they're telling themselves because they are bad readers. I put that in quotes. And so that's a really critical piece, is how do we support those students who just feel disheartened and are just, I saw some of the comments earlier, like they're not motivated. And I'm like, they're not motivated because they can't yet access the text. So I think that's a critical component. I also think this is hard work for teachers. And I think if we assume that 612 teachers want to do it, right? All of them with like excitement, that's also going to fall flat, right? It's not, we didn't go to become middle and high school teachers because we wanted to teach reading. I always say I first started as a middle school special education teacher because, quote, I didn't want to teach reading, which is comical now, but I had no interest in being responsible for 31st graders learning how to read. And so I think it's also recognizing where the teachers come from. And I think the way that Marietta did it so well is they were really strategic and not a school-wide initiative, but really targeting who was in each cohort as they laid out. And we know New Mexico is the first state that we know is doing this 612 actually, required by the State Department. And so, but they're also doing their ELA teachers, their English development teachers, and their special ed teachers. I also think Caitlin and Marietta did this really well. You guys started with leaders. It wasn't just about the teachers. And I think in the K-12 landscape, we're often seeing it's just training the teachers. And that's not going to move the needle. We need the leaders of these secondary schools to also have some understanding of the science of reading, but even greater, how to support, how to create those schedules. I know we've talked a lot about what that looks like at the high school in Marietta City, but that's another really critical component. It's not just the knowledge, but like, what does this look like with the uniqueness, especially I'm going to say in 9-12, which I think is a whole other complication compared to middle school.
Definitely. I want to bring Mary Hannah into the conversation, as she's been very much on the front lines of this work in Marietta, right? Very critical to that work. This training that we're talking about with the AIM Institute, the bulk of it generally is asynchronous, right? And the teachers are taking this on at their own pace. But the Marietta district has taken that a step further, and they've invested in hiring full-time facilitators who can conduct some of this training in person and help ensure that that content then is being implemented and translated into classroom practice. Mary Hannah, can you talk a little bit about why you guys did that and what kind of on-the-ground results you're seeing from that?
Sure. Yes, I'm Mary Hannah, and I'm fortunate to be the Structured Literacy Director in Marietta City Schools. So I'm so glad to be here and explain this model to you, because I think it is innovative and exciting, and we're seeing some pretty great things from our teachers and students. So I don't know if any of you are like me, but anything we do, as in right now too, is online, and people are in front of their computers a lot. And there's a lot out there of different quality and caliber, of course, but sometimes people, I would never do this and you wouldn't either, but sometimes people will sit behind the computer while they're doing something else and click through a module, and it just takes on a different meaning when you have on-site facilitation. And so we're very, very fortunate in both of our middle schools. We have a full-time on-site facilitator who is highly trained and qualified in structured literacy already. So we hired them and they work with me and they lead the cohorts of our teachers in through the AIM content. So we're not even asking them to do it at home. We're asking them to engage in job embedded PL. And a part of that includes providing a substitute day so that the teachers can go through the content with the live facilitator. And that's been so great because to have AIM is wonderful and they will partner with you and they'll answer any questions you have in a very timely manner. But there's just nothing like having an in-person teacher, someone who in the moment can see the look on your face and ask you, wait, okay, I see how that's sitting with you. Not sitting well, let's talk it through. So they answer clarifying questions. They're able to provide that side-by-side coaching with our teachers, which has also been really special. And part of the success we saw in our elementary rollout was that having the teacher have that side-by-side coaching in person to bring that research to practice that Carolyn was mentioned, just to bring it to life and to help our teachers implement what they're learning. So we're building their knowledge and helping them implement it. And so the pathway to proficient reading for secondary learners in AIM is wonderful. And it has, like Carolyn mentioned, videos of actual secondary students at their school. And it does help teachers have greater clarity about bridging that knowledge to practice. But having a real life human in the building has just been paramount, I think, to the work, especially because they're working with every teacher, not just a reading teacher who already has some background. And so what our facilitators do is they do action taking professional learning. That's what we call it. We have knowledge building and then action taking. And a lot of that includes modeling, co-planning with the teacher, looking at the diagnostic data in real time as we give them, give the assessments one-on-one. They'll bring their data to a PLC and the facilitator will help them work through that. And then we're just seeing a lot of gains. We're seeing gains in decoding and fluency and teacher practice. And I think I'll finish by saying I have seen anecdotally teacher confidence in collaborating with their facilitator and engaging with the AIM work. And they're bringing it to life, real life in their classrooms.
That's great. Carolyn, do you have time for one question?
Yeah, I think it's good timing. So yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I think we're talking about this extra investment into this work that the Marietta District has been able to do, but I think you and I have had this conversation, right, where that's not necessarily realistic for every district to add on those positions or kind of invest in that way. And in another vein, sometimes it's not realistic to commit to the full course. I know you have other opportunities available that are more digestible for districts that maybe want to try it or roll it out to different staff members.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say, I got this at a conference. So if anyone from Gwinnett County, Georgia, sorry, Marietta friends, they shared this idea. And I just thought it was so smart that when you roll out PD, you first need to start with your willing and able. And they had a whole matrix, but I love the idea of the willing and able first. And even Mary Hannah and Chuck, when we did cohort 1, you offered it to the willing and able on top of who was required. So I had a gym teacher in the cohort 1, like all in, right? And so I think first I would say without having a Mary Hannah, and we know, right, like that's not like the idea. It's the ideal. It's not what's the reality right now. Find a small group of the willing and able who are going to motivate others. And I saw that kind of question coming into the chat, like how do we get this momentum and motivation going? And that's how, right? Start with people who are going to inspire others to do the work. Two, again, I'm going to say leadership is so critical to this point because even if you don't have someone in a formal role, you could have a teacher leader in that willing and able group 1 who then is going to start leading exactly what Mary Hannah's kind of talked about. And I have a district in New York City. They made it work doing the same type of model. They did 6 sub days and they just went through the content together. And I think this came up earlier, like we're exhausted in this field, right? Like we're exhausted, we're burnt out. People I believe in PL clearly, but like people are really tired of it. And so doing the 55-hour course might not be the right move right now. And so to those individuals and to those school districts, I would say find the one thing. I would say, what's the one thing you can go do tomorrow? Um, I know, Caitlin, you asked specifically like what AIM has, and so we have smaller modules. For instance, we have a 4-hour vocabulary module. I just think of the power of a middle school all doing the simple vocabulary routine. And Mary Hannah and Chuck, like I know you guys implemented that. That's a 4-hour asynchronous course. There are some options for virtual or some live on training as well. But I think thinking about what is the capacity, who are the willing and able, finding some of those teacher leaders even doesn't have to be formal to do the work. And then again, if you don't have time for the 55-hour, find those smaller modules to kind of engage in. I know in Marietta City, we also did some of our English learner modules within the 55 hours. And so that could even be an option for some of the school districts. I don't know if Chuck and Mary Hannah, you guys have stuff to add. Bless you.
Bless you. Go ahead, Mary.
Echo that after my sneeze, excuse me, is that the vocabulary, if you're working with teachers outside of reading and ELA, vocabulary is such an easy on-ramp for everyone. All of our teachers, your health teacher, your CTAE teacher, every single teacher in your building wants their students to learn the content, the vocabulary that they're teaching. They're passionate about that. And so vocabulary has been an easy on-ramp, and AIM teaches a strategy for that, a simple routine that in our middle schools, they begin every class with it. And there's nothing magic about the beginning of class, but it's a way that the kids know what to expect. Like, this is what we're about to do. And it's been really great for every teacher.
Yeah, and when we were researching options and kind of looking into this world, we met with Sharon Vaughn at the Meadows Center at the University of Texas, right, Austin. And she, her big thing was identify essential vocabulary, right, and find a way to systematically like teach that to your students. Like that was a great on ramp for your middle school content teacher if it's not your traditional reading teacher. So obviously AIM has resources for that, and we took that advice to heart, and we've seen it paying dividends.
Perfect. I think sometimes there's a question in the chat, and we've addressed it a little bit, but there is this kind of everything's on fire feeling in education sometimes, and I think it can be kind of hard to get a focus and some of this motivation behind things when there's like something new popping up every day. Charles and Mary Hannah, like I know you had kind of like a natural in, right, when you were already doing the work in the early grades, but if you were talking to another district leader, right, who was like, I don't know where to start or if I can make the case for this, can you just briefly kind of maybe give some insight of how you might pitch this as a focus point? And I think we only have a minute or two left, so this is rapid fire.
Okay. Real quick, I'll say, if everything's important, nothing's important, right? So you've got to identify a focus. And so I think that's something our board and our superintendent have done well. We believe that when kids, we know that third grade reading is a predictor of high school graduation and many other things. And so we felt like that was a linchpin. And I think there's plenty of data out there to show that it is a linchpin. So I think it's a matter of, we dedicate our principal meetings, probably 90% of them, and our assistant principal meetings are dedicated to literacy leadership at this point. So we have gone all in and invested on it. Our school board will tell you, and our superintendent, safety is our top priority and literacy is number 2. And so, and it's been that way consistently for 5 years. So I think just keeping the main thing and not focusing on everything, I think has been part of the key to success. So that's the advice I would give, is just really do a deep dive on your priorities and determine if you're really focused on the most important work, or if you've got some things that are distracting you from it.
Yeah, and I would just end by saying that something that's really motivating is when you can see the fruits of your labor. And so we've always had reading teachers. We've always had teachers who work hard. And something that's really motivating is for our reading teachers to be able to see their students growing.
Perfect. Well, that is a perfect bow to put on the end of our session. Thank you guys so much for being here. I have had a great time talking with you today. So I will pitch it back over to Ryan.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, Carolyn, Mary, and Charles. I know that was a great session to listen to, but we're going to kind of close the loop here and turn things back to Steven Sawchuk, who's going to bring on one of our senior staff writers, Evie Bland, and they'll be digging into whether reading policy will be able to catch up with kind of the trends that we've been seeing. So now we are going to turn the chat on again so you guys can weigh in a little more, as we would love to, get everyone a little more interactive here as we know the session's coming to a close shortly. So Stephen, Evie, take it away.
Hey, thank you so much. So yes, we have opened up the chat again, and basically, we want you to be typing as I ask a few questions. I have Evie Blad with me, who is my reporter who helps to cover state policy. And one of the things that we thought about when we were putting this report together was the fact that almost all the states, at least 40, have passed some form of reading legislation. And, the focus points are a little different. Sometimes they're very specific about curriculum, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they get into teacher training, sometimes it's all professional development. But many of you are now working in states that have had these laws. But we wanted to kick the tires about whether they've addressed this problem of middle and high school students who struggle to read. So my first question for you, and while you answer, Evie and I will chat a little bit too about her reporting. But my first question to you is, how many of you are in states with reading laws, and have they been helpful in shaping your work? If they have, tell us why. And if you haven't necessarily seen the effects of that, we'd like to hear that from you too. So go ahead and chat. Don't be shy. I'm definitely not a shy person. I can always talk, and I know because Evie's my reporter that she's definitely not a shy person either. So
Right. Yeah. So we know that at least 40 states have passed what you would call like a flagship reading law, which outlines things like how do we screen students for reading, for concerns about their literacy skills? What kind of professional development do we provide teachers, foundational training? How do schools intervene and ongoing screening? Very few of those laws have extensive requirements for students beyond third grade. Some go up to fifth or sixth grade. But very few of them provide the same level of sort of comprehensive detail and expectations for students in older grades. And that's for a good reason, right? Third grade is such an important cutoff. But students, as we've heard today, oftentimes pass that threshold, and then teachers are not equipped to address some of their needs.
So reading some of the things that have come in from the chat is quite interesting because quite a number of people here mentioned, like Laura, for example, Wyoming is only K through 3. And one of the things she says here is, I don't think it's informed by actual research on screening and intervention to extend that to K through 12. In fact, when I was going through the list of pre-submitted questions, one of the things a lot of people asked about were like, do we know what good screeners look like are for older readers? I mean, you don't want to give them something like Dibbles with nonsense words. It's for very young, that tends to be for very young children. And that to me aligns with some of what we heard today about there are just far fewer resources for students at older grades. Um, Rachel from Arkansas says the laws really impacted K through 6, but not 7 to 12 yet. So not when you're starting to get to upper secondary. I think I saw somebody at the very top. Thank you for these great comments, everybody. From Natasha, who says Virginia has addressed the problem K to 8, and Virginia is one of the only states, right, Evie, that passed something specific for middle school. Is that right?
Yeah, so Virginia built on its original literacy law and extended it up through eighth grade a year later. And they certainly have the most comprehensive literacy law that applies to students beyond third grade. We know that in Indiana, they require screeners for students in grades 4 through 8. Folks in Virginia would tell you that a screener is really great and really important, but they want to just see some more comprehensive work on preventative things and what do you do when that screener identifies concerns. New Mexico requires additional PD in fundamental literacy concepts for ELA and special education teachers in grades 6 through 12, but they don't take it as far as Virginia. In Virginia, if you're a science or a math teacher, you also have to take PD on fundamental literacy concepts, which is something that is far outside of the realm of why someone might go to school to be a middle school science teacher.
Excellent. We're still getting great comments here. So hopefully, and please feel free to ask questions of one another too, because I know Natasha has been asked what diagnostic are you using. So please do share. This is your opportunity. Let me ask a second question for all of you here. A lot of you have said no, we don't have it, or the resources. We're not really sure about how to align the science for older readers. So. What would be helpful for you on that? Like, if you could sit a legislator down and say, here's how to write a law that would support us in this, what components would you like to see? Um, Imagine Evie and me are boring lawmakers in our tacky office somewhere in a state capital. How would you tell us to shape a law? Money. Okay, that's a good answer.
Because your state doesn't just pass a law, say for K3, when they passed the literacy law, it didn't fix everything overnight. We know that implementation challenges are huge, and sometimes state laws can be pretty rigid. Sometimes they don't acknowledge some of the structural barriers in schools. We've heard a lot today, questions about scheduling, which is a huge concern for secondary students. They don't have as much designated time for interventions.
Continue to see people saying, well, we use things like dibbles, but we have to supplement them. We have to change various aspects of them.
I
Some
should say
people are,
that Virginia designed its own screener. The Virginia Literacy Project at the university designed its own screener, and it piloted it in schools with, I believe, something like 8,000 students to help really
Mhm.
home in on the most effective ways of measuring. So if you score below basic on state testing, how do we identify which specific skills you need the most work on?
Right. Equitable. Okay, so we have a nice paragraph here from Frankietta. Evidence-based reading instruction, culturally relevant materials, to which I might add age-appropriate materials, right? We've heard that from a bunch of people today too. Trained educators, consistent intervention, sustainable funding, more partnerships with public universities that do educational research. That's true. Materials are very expensive. Pay teacher training. If you were with us in the very first session this morning, you probably saw that a lot of people don't get training for working with these students. They have to sort of foot the bill out of pocket. Um, let's see. Evie, that Virginia screener, do you know if like how the components work, or is there anything in particular that it looks for? Um,
I can't recall enough of the technical details on the specifics. I did share
yeah.
a link to the screener
Oh,
in
good.
the
Okay, we should all
chat.
look at that. Yeah.
It also includes like specific subtests. So the way students are identified for screening is if they score below a certain threshold on a portion of the state reading test, and teachers can also refer students for screening.
Hmm.
And there are specific subtext tests that they can be
Right.
administered depending on what
Right.
standards they didn't hit.
Yeah, because when you use one of these early screening tools, they're not going to look at something like morphology and test, like whether they're specific. I mean, that the multisyllabic words is not really a focus so much in those early grades. So, I'd be interested in knowing also if there's a way to do this that starts. Oh, here, Natasha has some nice subtests: oral reading fluency, spelling
Yeah.
morphology, right? Phoneme segmenting, letter sounds. Those are all passage comprehension. Thank you, Natasha. That's really, really.
Yes, I didn't want to misspeak. I'm sorry about that. Um, I'm also seeing a lot in here about whole child concerns, in what you would like your state law to address. That's something that I heard consistently when I talk to folks about state laws for older readers, which you would think that that would be a more of a classroom or a school level discussion. But in talking about what professional development looks like, if I'm a middle school science teacher and I'm learning about foundational reading skills, A, um, how to determine when a child's struggle in class is related to I don't understand science versus I can't access the text. And sometimes that can be hard to decode. And B, there's a lot of calls to learn about more about um, uh, the psychology of student engagement and motivation, because a student may be disengaged because they're not interested, because they're too cool for school, but it can also be a protective thing, right? That students build up over time. And so how can teachers learn to, it doesn't sound like there's a silver bullet for that, but how can they learn to kind of strip away some of those protective layers, where a student may not want to admit that they don't understand, but it's easier to say I don't care than it is to say I don't understand, right? And so a lot of calls for that being a part of how educators for secondary students learn to work through these issues.
Let's see, going through the last two. Some detail on Arizona's past efforts here. Letters training. Well, that's interesting because we often think of letters as being something that elementary students, teachers of elementary students go through. But some of the fundamentals are obviously do carry throughout the grade. Yeah, letters is very time consuming. When I understand, Tennessee also has a sort of a somewhat more truncated reading fundamentals program that they put teachers through. I do not know off the top of my head if that extends to older teachers as well. Um,
One other thing that I'm not seeing in here that's part of Virginia's law that is interesting is that, like other states do for elementary school students, Virginia's law requires individual reading plans for older students who have some gaps in their foundational skills, similar to an IEP, and they require a lot of family buy-in. So families have to understand the process. Teachers of subject area classes have to understand what's involved in students' reading plans. And the state has also requires districts to identify what resources are we giving to families to make sure they understand this is where your child is at in reading, what kinds of conversations can you have at home. And of course, implementation will be a big factor there, but the family, giving families some agency and some tools to engage with this, I think is an interesting part.
Let me ask just one more question and then we'll do our wrap up of today's Essentials Forum. So my last question is, earlier when we had the two women from New Hampshire, one of the things that they said that was difficult was not having great materials. So let me ask you, like, what do you think, what kinds of materials would you like in order to be able to work with this age group? Are there any out there that you have found to be helpful? Have you had to sort of pick and choose, or cobble together as the partners at Bow Middle School in New Hampshire have done? Tell us a little bit more about, if you're trying to get this done, do you have the materials you need to work with kids to do this work? Okay, a good resource here on morphology. This is another thing, Ebby, that I think comes up when we report on reading is often like people are very focused on the curriculum in the lower grades. And then, it's less clear. Of course, also like the secondary levels is when or middle schools when you tend to get a lot of the basal readers, right? The big anthologies, which might not have complete texts, whole texts. Um, Chelsea mentions quad text sets. I don't know what those are, but if you can explain what those are, Chelsea, I'm interested in learning more. Newsella is helps take news articles and make them accessible for students. Quad text sets. I need to write that down. We'll look into that. Any final thoughts before we get to our final Sarah Lupo's examples? Thank you, Chelsea. Let me see here. Yes, Sharon, you should be able to access the webinar later. Thanks for asking that question. We have a cell phone ban, morphine magic. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for engaging in this very rich discussion. A lot of resources here that I want to follow up on, and I hope that you do too. I'm going to let Abby go, and we're going to just wrap up with a few final thoughts from me. So I think Ryan is back to
You.
help. Thanks, Abby.
Yeah, just popping in here to say that we're gonna be wrapping things up. So Stephen's gonna take it away and give a few of our closing lines. So Stephen, I'll let you get to that, and then I'll put a bow on the present here for us.
Well, first, let me just thank everyone in the chat. Frankietta has been active in the chat. Chelsea, Natasha, we're learning things from you as much as you're learning from us, hopefully, and that's the sign of a really good event. There were a couple of themes that I just wanted to that struck me as coming through almost every session. So I think it's worth reiterating those. One of them is this idea that when you're attending to these students' needs, these older readers' needs, you also have to attend to the social emotional journey that they may be on, right? In terms of being later, in terms of later to develop these reading skills, in terms of having materials that fit them that don't feel too babyish or too below their levels, like the frustration they may have struggled over the years. I think we heard the two women from Bow Elementary say something like they didn't want to be in one-on-one intervention. They wanted to be part of the social part of schooling, which is when you're with other kids, right? And one of the brilliant things about that is that it's a bunch of kids going through this together who see that they aren't alone and, have access to really, really powerfully trained teachers. Um, Another thing I think that we heard is that this work isn't necessarily resource intensive, it's knowledge intensive, right? So that is why it was so important to focus on making sure that teachers get some support with this. Like we heard that about the training that New Mexico and the Marietta district have used. The importance of recognizing that you're working with teachers who might not have a certification in reading, and so that is also a different thing than working with those who might have had methods in their preparation program. Another thing is that this is important for leaders to have some knowledge. They might not have to be trained at the same level as teachers, but without leader buy-in and knowledge, this is pretty much not going to work. And I think we often don't think about the importance of leaders in supporting the acquisition of teacher knowledge and then making sure that that happens. That really struck me with what the team from Marietta, Georgia was saying. And then finally, I think our last one, we're all trying to figure out what is the best way to identify the students that need help, what are the best materials to use, and how can we honestly put pressure on people who develop curricula, on state lawmakers, people who write these laws, to attend to these kids. Like that's another important thing. That we want to do. EdWeek's role in this, I think, is having events like this, writing these kinds of stories, hosting people from around the country to do this. And we really want to thank you for the role that you play in it as well. So thanks again. I'm really, really excited that so many of you found this event to be helpful. I know that you'll be able to log back in and review a recording of the webinar too, if you want to go back and review anything. But for now, I hope you have a wonderful Thursday evening. And thank you, as always, for reading, subscribing, engaging with Education Week. We really depend on you, and never be afraid to send us questions or comments or anything else that you think could be helpful. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for rounding that out. I think that you really did a great job kind of framing how EdWeek views our mission in this initiative. And like Stephen said, the chat has been one of the most active that we've seen in one of these webinars. So we will be sending out information that will let you access the recording of today's events. So you can rewatch any of the sessions that you found particularly engaging. You'll also be able to reread any of the chats from the interactive sessions and view all the poll results, as well as a certificate of completion for anyone that's using this event as professional development. So before we log off, a final huge thank you to K-12 Tutoring and 95% Group for sponsoring today's event. And it's been a true pleasure to be your host today. And I hope you all leave here energized and bring these learnings back to your districts and schools. So I'm going to steal something from the chat here to have a great day on purpose. I think that is a great kind of attitude to take the day on with, Frankietta. So hope you guys all have a good day.